Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, and with me this morning again is Dr. Peter Kuznick. Peter, introduce yourself to folks who may not have seen your last shows with us.
Well, professor of history and director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University, and probably most prominently co-author with Oliver Stone of The Untold History of the United States, among a lot of other books.
I,
That's
I, I
it's my only documentary series. It was up initially
my,
on Showtime and Netflix
my,
and
my
everything.
bit of trivia, the only personal connection I can really make to American University is that I'm from Los Angeles. I grew up watching Kareem. I am a Kermit Washington fan.
Yeah, well, he was quite a
American
player.
University.
He was quite a
Yes.
player and had an unfortunate incident in his career with Rudy
The
Tomjanovich.
very what's
He-
fascinating is the instigator of that whole fight, Kevin Cunnert, who got into the scrap with Kareem under the basket, who started everything, ended up on the Portland Trailblazers with Kermit Washington for several years, not too long after, and they had to play together.
That's funny. That part of the
And
story I didn't know. But
very
everybody I know who knew him then, I wasn't there yet, but everybody who knew Kermit said he was a very gentle soul, like the last
yes,
person you'd ever
yes.
expect to do that.
His job was to play physical with people to keep Kareem out of trouble. So when Kareem got in a fight, his job was to get over there and get Kareem out of the fight. And while he was getting Kareem out of the fight, Rudy Tomjanovich comes running up behind him, which people did in those days. There is a very famous fight between Dr. J and Larry Bird, in which another of my favorites, Moses Malone, grabs Larry Bird in a headlock and pulls him to the floor. So this is the sort of thing that happened in the classical NBA. But because he felt someone running up behind him while in a
But
fight,
Chris, to transition, right now it is the Iranians who have punched and shattered Donald Trump's jaw, and Donald Trump,
exactly.
you know,
He ran right into the punch.
Donald Trump and Netanyahu started the fight, and now they're both lying on the floor.
They ran right into the punch, and it's worse because unlike Rudy, who was running in after it started, they're Kevin Cunnert. They started the fight, and they ran into the punch on purpose.
Yeah, yeah, they
which,
went
which
in
leads us to the
eyes wide open.
Which leads us to the nuclear appeal that we're here to talk about. You and a colleague have gotten quite a few people to sign on to an appeal to Pope Leo to get people together to talk about maybe not blowing the world up.
That's a good idea. So we can do another show and talk more about basketball. It's just gotten so insanely dangerous. There's so much talk about nuclear war. So many people are actually taking it seriously. In the United States, there's a whole new school of nuclear strategists who say that a nuclear war can be fought and won. For decades, beginning with Reagan and Gorbachev, the leaders have been saying a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. There's been a growing understanding that it's almost impossible to stop a nuclear war after a limited exchange. Every time they try to war game for limited nuclear war, it ends up in full-scale nuclear annihilation. But knowing that, there are some loonies out there who have respectable titles who think that you can fight and win a nuclear war. Most recently, Elbridge Colby, the policy chief for the Pentagon, has been writing that given the U.S. lack of munitions if fighting breaks out in the Pacific, we have to rely on tactical nuclear weapons, he says. Well, we use a tactical nuclear weapon against China. They come back with 2 or 3 against us, and it goes from there into full-scale nuclear holocaust.
Why would, and let's stop and ask a serious question, because as far as I know, regardless of whether the U.S. decides to change its policy or not, as far as I know, China and Russia are still committed to the idea of deterrence through mutually assured destruction. And it may not necessarily just be China launching a tactical nuke back.
You know, we don't know. There's no way to know how these things unfold. That's why people are bringing up August of 1914 so much. Barbara Tuchman's book about August of 1914, The Folly of War. You know, nobody wanted a war in 1914, except that with all these entangled alliances, it happened. And we're in a similar situation today. I don't think any rational person, or even irrational people like Donald Trump, I don't think they, now Donald Trump is a unique case, because as a pathological narcissist, he doesn't really care what happens besides himself and maybe his family. So he thinks that with his own demise, that's the end of anything to even be concerned about. But most leaders
why care what happens?
Of commitment, of caring about history, caring about their legacy, caring about their countries. What we're saying in this appeal to Pope Leo XIV, let me give a little bit of background. Jack Gilroy of Pax Christi and Veterans for Peace initiated a sign-on letter to Archbishop Wester, who's the Archbishop of Santa Fe, New Mexico, the leading voice in the U.S. Church for nuclear abolition and the leading anti-war person in the U.S. Church. And there's an appeal to him to reach out to Pope Leo. I signed on that. I was helping promote that. But I was in Italy for an alternative university summer program, an international one. And I met there with the Cardinal Semeraro. Semeraro is in charge of the sanctification, people who become saints. And I talked to him and gave him the letter to Archbishop Wester, and he said he would bring it directly to the Pope. He said on 2 separate occasions, he was bringing it to the Pope, which meant that the Wester initiative had now been surpassed because we had gotten this message directly to the Pope. So I drafted a new appeal, a much broader appeal, that I wanted to work on 2 levels. On the first level was the appeal to the Pope to call for an emergency international summit, realizing how close we are to nuclear war and nuclear annihilation. And it calls for an ending of the Ukraine war, ending of the Iran war, easing of tensions in the Pacific, and minimally getting together Putin and Xi and Trump. But the idea was, which Jack Gilroy established in the initial letter, we talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And in that crisis, there was an appeal to UTANT at the United Nations to issue an international appeal if nothing else worked. But there was also an appeal made to Pope John the 23rd. And Pope John XXIII did issue an international appeal urging Kennedy and Khrushchev to both choose the path of peace rather than war. And Khrushchev later said that this has provided him the cover that he needed to gracefully end the Cuban Missile Crisis without going to war. So based on that, based on Paul VI, based on all of the statements by popes and the recent statements by Leo himself about the threat of nuclear annihilation and the insanity of war, to have Pope Leo, who has a unique kind of moral authority. He's been a very strong moral voice ever since he became Pope and even before. And so we thought he's probably the one person maybe along with Guterres at the UN, who's got the moral authority to make an appeal to the leaders of the world to stop this madness before it's too late. That's always the idea. While we're still here, we can stop it. But once it starts, then nobody stops it. And there's nobody left alive to tell them that they were crazy. In the nuclear era, there is no more room for warfare. And besides that, even from a practical standpoint, you look at Russia's invasion of Ukraine, provoked as it was still wrong. And then the US-Israeli war with Iran. The most powerful countries, Russia and the United States, are losing. They're getting their lunch eaten. They're getting their asses handed to them. And all the threats. So Trump can't get out of Iran, despite his trying desperately, saying 14 times or more that we've won the war, that they're desperate to negotiate. Despite all of that, now what's he doing? He's threatening Oman. He said, we're going to bomb the shit out of Oman. He's calling off the war games with South Korea, because South Korea is not helping us. He's threatening the Europeans because they're not helping the US. Of course, nobody wants to get involved in this madness, except for Netanyahu, who convinced Trump. Netanyahu is trying to convince an American president to go to war with Iran for more than 3 decades, but he couldn't find somebody stupid enough and ignorant enough to do it till Donald Trump. And so Trump does it, and now the US is trapped.
But that's the worst part, is that you hear Democrats still now, as we're having this show, Democrats still saying, well, it's not that we have a problem with what Donald Trump is doing with Iran, it's that he's doing it illegally.
Well, there are some Democrats who do say he should have gone through Congress. However, a lot of Democrats are saying this is really fucked, that the United States should never have done this, that Trump is a menace. 80% of American Democrats.
This is the dichotomy. When people say Democrats, the instinct is to think, the people who vote for the party. And yet, when I say Democrats, I never mean the people who vote for the party, because the party itself has made it very clear those people don't matter to them. And by that, I simply mean, and I say this with a little snark because I was against the energy some people were putting into what were ultimately pro-right wing and pro-Russia sort of criticisms of Biden more than real concerns about nuclear war. But it's true that there were a lot of people who thought Trump was going to be less pro-war than Biden and Kamala Harris because of all the stupid things Biden and Harris were doing. And Hillary Clinton did not make it easier for Democrats when she came out and said, I think Trump should be going to war with Iran. This is good.
Well, the Clinton wing of the party has been a nightmare. It was back in 2011 that Clinton announced the Asia pivot. An article in Foreign Policy magazine titled America's Pacific Century. Well, there was just an article in the Council of Foreign Relations publication, Foreign Affairs, a couple of days ago, saying the United States is finished in the Middle East, in Southwest Asia. So that whole fantasy about U.S. hegemony, whether it's America's Pacific century, America's Southwest Asian century, the United States now has become a laughingstock, and Trump is an international laughingstock. The problem is he can blow up the world. I was on the other day. Who was I? Oh, it was one of my. It was, I think, India, which I've got to do in another 10 minutes. But I was on with was it Indian show or the Middle East? I was on with one international television show, in which the host said he had heard that Trump asked for the nuclear codes and General Kane refused to give them. This was supposed to just a few days ago. It's an apocryphal story, but it reflects the mindset globally right now that people actually believe and understand that Trump is very capable of this.
And
He's got
I'm going to go
he
ahead
has
and
no way to get out. The Iranians won't let their foot up off Trump's neck, won't give him some way he can get out and claim victory as he likes to do. And in fact, he's the most reviled figure in the world. Uh, and
yes.
and and the United States right now is an impotent superpower, but it has the power, the potential to blow the world up rather than to go down gracefully. And so that's the
I'm
terrible dilemma that we're facing right now. Well, how is this going
yes.
to end? That's why we think that Pope Leo has the moral authority to make this kind of appeal in a way that nobody else does. And we've had people signing on, former prime ministers of Japan, former presidents of other countries. Mostly the people in power won't do it right now, but maybe even they will circulate it behind the scenes. Which is what we're hoping for, to get Pope Leo to take a very dramatic and risky step, but the only one that we can think of right now to get us off this path of war. If people have other suggestions, because afterwards we can deal with climate change, afterwards we can deal with the economic inequalities, with social injustice, but we have to make sure that they don't get us into a nuclear war almost overnight, from which there's no turning back.
And this is where I want to take a moment to address this comment question by our friend and colleague Yuri Smouter. Most nuclear wars would end by accident, correct? To which my response is that has been the story that Hollywood media has fed us for many years. Or, conspiracies by secret bad guys. But the reason we're having this show is there are people in the Pentagon who like the idea of using nuclear weapons and starting one on purpose.
Elbridge Colby is one example, but the Bullet and the Atomic Scientist said there's a whole school out there of nuclear strategists who think a nuclear war can be fought and won. And and these people have been around for a long time. In 2006, Lieber and Press had an article in Foreign Affairs, and the Washington Post reported that heads were exploding in the Kremlin because they thought this was official U.S. policy to have a preemptive strike. We know that Lemnitzer briefed Kennedy about a U.S. preemptive strike. We know that McClaw, we've had these people for years who have been arguing for this kind of policy. And now with Trump in there, again, they think they've got somebody. The first article that Ivana Hughes and I wrote in Al Jazeera was called Breaking the Nuclear Taboo. And in that, we explained why Donald Trump is totally capable of using nuclear weapons preemptively by choice. So it could be by accident or it could be by choice. But in either case, we're gone. And I'm afraid that Chris, I've got to be gone from this show today. Sorry, but
I will let you.
We'll do it again soon.
Definitely, I'll make sure to email before you do this time. You have a good day.
Take care, Chris.
And Peter is right. It's not just a matter of being something new. This goes a long way back. As long ago as Edwin Teller and Robert Oppenheimer, during the time that the hydrogen bomb was being developed, Edwin Teller was saying we should actually use the bomb when it's developed. And Oppenheimer was saying, no, that would be the worst thing we could possibly do. And this was actually a point of policy dispute within the nuclear research establishment. When George Wallace ran for president against LBJ, people remember that he was a horrible racist and was running to defend segregation, which is true. What people don't remember and should is that he was also running with Strategic Air Command commanding officer Curtis LeMay as his running mate. And one of the points of their platform was that control of the nuclear arsenal should be taken away from the US president and given directly to the commander of Strategic Air Command, because the military would be more likely to push the button if necessary than the president. This was actually part of a political campaign. It may still be officially part of the platform of the American Independent Party. I don't know anymore. I haven't looked at their crazy platform recently enough. But it's something to think about, that this has been a tension within American policy and research communities forever. As Peter said, JFK was being pushed to launch a preemptive nuclear strike against the USSR during the Cuban Missile Crisis. If he had said yes, that would have been that. So the biggest concern, even though it's been presented that way for a long time, the biggest concern is less an accident and more some person deciding for whatever reason that pushing the button is the right thing to do and just doing it. And that's far more concerning than any sort of accident, and far more likely than any sort of accident, because accidents require a lot of probabilities to line up just right. A deliberate nuclear attack just has to involve a human decision, and people make the wrong decisions all the time. Accidents frighten me much less than the deliberate decisions made by people in power. I'll be totally honest about that. I think that the main reason to be against really any sort of nuclear development here in the U.S. is ultimately we can't trust people not to be using weaponizing nuclear technology behind our backs. But that's a whole other policy question. There are so many things to discuss about nuclear policy, and I am old enough that when I see people on the left start saying pro-nuclear things, even just talking about nuclear energy, because I don't know of anyone who's pro-nuclear weapons, but I'm old enough that when I see people on the left talking about pro-nuclear power, I immediately feel like this is some sort of deep betrayal of the basic anti-nuclear compact model that goes all the way back to the Cold War, where we need to disarm, we need to get rid of nuclear weapons. Herman Wauch, in his masterpiece, War and Remembrance, has one of his characters say, either war is finished or we are. And that's one of the most important things to remember in this modern world, is that we now have the capacity to pretty much destroy life on Earth because we want to. And that should really be much more concerning than an accident, especially when we live in a world where the CEO of a major company like Palantir, which has contracts with the US and other governments all over the world, is saying, the US should change the Constitution to allow more things that we call war crimes now, because that would be good for business. And I can't help but connecting that to the same attitude we've had for years in the military-industrial complex, that there might be a situation where we really should fire a nuke at someone. And that's really the concern, is that after all these years, Cold War, nuclear paranoia, everything, there are still people in power who want to fire nuclear weapons. That's the best place for me to stop. I know this has been a short show. Hopefully that'll mean more people watch the recording. If you have joined us live, I really appreciate it. I still haven't found work yet, so supporting the show really, really, really helps right now. Check out the Patreon and the Substack. They're both Eclectic Radical. If If you can help, please consider helping. This is the only real income I have right now because my unemployment just ran out. So thank you very much for paying attention to me. Hopefully things will get better. And I hope everyone has a great week. Until next Sunday, when I will be returning with Erica Eiffel from Canada's Hill Times and the Bad and Bitchy podcast. I'll tweet at you.